All right, so welcome to this week's episode of Microverse's Lunch and Learn. I'm Paul, and together with Kyle, we'll be hosting today's talk. Before I introduce our guest speaker, let me just remind you that Microverse is a coding school where people from all around the world learn to code by pair programming with team members, and students who enroll in this program also, they don't have to pay anything until they land a job. So every week, we bring in a guest speaker to share their professional journeys and their experiences working on topics such as pair programming, remote work, and open source, etc. This week, our guest is Rowan Weismiller from Bench Code, and he'll be giving a talk about finding opportunity in community. Hello, Rowan. Thank you for joining us. How you doing?
Okay, is this working now? Okay, my AirPods, for whatever reason, keep cutting out, and I can't switch to the native MacBook audio. So you guys probably do this day in, day out. I do this once in a while. So already a little bit of a glimpse into what my working life is like.
Not a problem. Well, we can hear you fine currently, so we won't be doing too much questions via audio.
I'll just
If
keep
you can hear me,
reconnecting, I guess. It just might be really annoying. Hopefully that doesn't keep happening.
well, I'll just let you know the last details here, that the webinar features a Q&A window where users can submit your questions to Rowan. And then as for questions, they can be then marked as answered as we go through. And Rowan, you can decide if you'd like to answer questions as you go or wait till the end.
I'm happy to take questions as I go.
Okay, very well. So you guys will be able to submit those questions.
Ask them and answer them on the spot. Like, I want this to be pretty open. Like, all my lessons I'm sharing are not, I'm not like giving you a how-to that you need to follow chronologically, strictly in order to get it. It's just like working with people and how to actually get a lot out of people. And I want to make the most out of my time with you guys here. So if you have a question, ask it.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much. We'll let you, we'll be turning off our audio and video, and we'll let you take it away. I'll only chime in there if something occurs, but otherwise I'll check the Q's and A's once in a while, and you'll probably notice a little red badge pop up next to them as well, okay?
Awesome.
All right,
okay,
take it away,
cool.
Rowan.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Paul.
My pleasure.
Cool. So I wanted to talk a little bit actually about something that came up. Oh God, I have to mute myself now. Oh, all right. Cutting that out for now. I wanted to talk a little bit about something that's come up recently for me, something that I learned in this past year. And it came up out of a need to identify for myself, how do I make an impact using technology that isn't just serving private for-profit industry. It's been the industry I've been working in for the past couple of years. Well, 6 years I've been working in this industry now. And I kind of desired contributing more to the people around me. Like, I walk around and I see people and I wonder to myself, in technology, am I helping people? And I really, I'm a bit, I guess, selfish in the desire to help people who I see and can talk to and learn from. And I think it's a good kind of selfish. But previously, I've just been working, helping people who I've never met. We just had this idea of the customer, and it's people on the internet are benefiting somehow from the work I do. And I realized that there was a big gap in actually like building community of people who know how technology impacts them and have I guess a place to go where they can actually come and talk about how public life and technology interrelate. So this is where I started looking to communities around me to really get a sense of like, what is the role of technology in people's lives? And this is when I started the meetup that I'm working on now, called Civic Tech Vancouver. I live in a city called Vancouver, and there was nothing like that here. So we started that up. I found other people like me who were interested in this topic and wanted to do that. So this is something that there was not a community for, but I wanted to create so that there would be opportunity for people around me to have the kind of conversations I wanted to be having. So it's kind of selfish, but also something in service of others. And it's led to a whole bunch of opportunities. So that's where I'm coming from when I'm talking about community. But I would like to give you guys a little bit of a background on who I am, like why is this important to me, and how did I get here. So I come from a background of design. I studied design. Well, before that, let's go before that. I'm from Vancouver. I grew up here, raised here, went to school here, always had a latent interest in computers. I have always been the kind of person who wanted to like pull open the settings and figure out exactly what was possible with the tools I was using. And that was from like the age of like 5. And then I went to school. I went to actually like study computer science, and I thought it was horrible. Thought it was just the worst. I thought it had no connection to people and what they were actually experiencing in their life. And it was all abstract, and I hated it. And then I went to design school, and I learned all about people and all of their issues. And I had all these great ideas, and I realized I needed to learn computer science and programming in order to actually make those ideas real. So that's kind of where my background comes from. And I've managed to get lucky because I entered my work from school into a competition. So I had 2 projects in a competition, and one of the judges came over and spent a long time chatting with me about my work and asked me if I'd like to interview at the company that he was working at, which was like, yeah, of course. Yes, please. I actually still work with him. This is a different company, and we've just been working together a couple places together now. So good relationship to establish at the start of a career. And again, an example of just like participating in a competition, just putting yourself out there and being with people will yield all of the opportunities for your career, especially starting out. And then from there, I just got really interested in web technologies. Like everybody around me seemed to be into web and what we can do with web technologies to impact the most people. Like web is like the app that everyone already has installed. You don't need to create another app. It's just people go to a URL. That's where they look to for information. And I love this idea. I mean, I grew up on the web. I was always connecting with people through the web, and communities, online communities, offline communities created because of online communities. Like this is all part of my life. Meetup.com is a website that I'm on frequently, and I've organized meetups through there, attended meetups through there. And it's integral to how I view the web. It's a tool for connecting people. And so this is something that I chose to double down on in my career. And how do we bring people together from like the public sector and the private sector? Yeah, so that's kind of my origin story. I work at a company now called Bench Accounting, and I'm a front-end software engineer. And I don't think that's the most interesting part about my life or my career at all. Although I do it full-time as a job. I do it because I like doing it, and it's a lot of fun, and I get to learn a lot about web technologies. But what it really unlocks for me is this. I guess I get the skill set and the network to go and do the things I really want to do, which is how do I bring people together in this community, in this industry, and do more meaningful work that benefits citizens. That's that. I'd like to talk a little bit about civic tech now and what that is, what its goals are. So civic tech is, at least in Canada, I can speak to. I'm sure, I mean, there's tons of other civic tech communities across the world. Like Taiwan has a really good civic tech community. Code for America, the United States had a really strong civic tech presence. It's a little bit back since the Trump administration, but Canada has a thriving civic tech community that's growing, and it's pretty much about getting the people together to make change management decisions. And the broadest strokes, it's the hard part about technology is not the coding itself. It's about the people that it will impact and getting the buy-in. So getting people around you to want that kind of change or improvement to their lives. Because it's not always a given, and it doesn't always operate the same way in the public sector that it would operate in the private sector, where you can just deploy some code and the people will stumble upon it and use it. And then you just advertise the shit out of it. If you like launch a service that people depend on, it's a very, very different kind of environment to be operating in. And I want to learn from people who are doing that kind of stuff and do that myself one day. Yeah, so Civic Tech is 1 year old in Vancouver. and we're about 7 people who just put on meetups, and we have about 30 to 60 attendees every month. And we bring in speakers who come in to talk about public service initiatives, civic engagement, projects that they're doing where they're solving problems that they're experiencing in the public sector using technology. We hear from non-government organizations about what they're doing in the civic tech space, like maybe solving problems through a product that handles garbage collection schedules. As an example, there's a company called Recollect here, who's dealing with garbage collection. There's government groups that are forming that are trying to figure out how to introduce digital into their units, like their government units, and how do you sell things like development operations, or how do you sell service design so that you can actually plot out what people are experiencing when they're interacting with the government service over time, and where does it make sense to make an intervention with technology. So this is like the kind of stuff that I'm really interested in. Yeah, I'm really not super prepared for this to have like a really like, here's like half an hour of content. So if anybody has any questions, like I'd be super, super happy to chat. It's a bit strange for me, to be honest, to just like talk at a computer. And I would love to hear more about what kind of things you guys are learning about and are curious about, and if you're involved in any communities right now, and what you guys are up to. Just catching up on messages. I can see Paul.
I'm just putting up my webcam back on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great, excellent. Yeah, absolutely. It's just an open forum. What we do typically to avoid issues is make it, I know it seems like you're just talking to a computer, but this is actually to avoid some possible issues with feedback for sound and whatnot. But certainly we'll wait to see if people have questions, but open forum if you want to discuss anything. One question I would have would be to, again, we're coming from perspective people, a bit more about us if you weren't aware. We're all basically looking to, if we're in the program or looking to join the program, we're basically aspiring developers. We're trying to get their foot in the door. There we go. Yeah, you can see the chat. Q&As are fine. Yes, Michael, you can definitely send Q&As, or chat is probably fine as well. Yes, you can raise a hand too. Absolutely. So I guess a question that all of us would typically ask would be, do you have specific advice on what skills do you think are most valuable when applying for your first job? Where some of them are actually doing that right now. We're interviewing as we speak to various places. Would you say there are maybe some examples of do's and don'ts that for someone who's looking for their first job in development?
Yeah, I think that like in your first job, I think it's like, don't fuss too much about it. I guess that's something that I would stress, like just put yourself out there and get your foot in the door. It seems like pretty straightforward advice, but you will learn so much wherever you start. So just start. It does not have to be perfect. That's like the one thing I would definitely share. Like I had no idea what I wanted or what I was doing. That came later. Like if you want to work in tech and you want to be a dev, like go make stuff and talk to people who need help making stuff. And if there's an opening for you, take it and see what you learn. That's pretty much it. I think it should be the focus of anyone who's aspiring to write software. There are lots of people who need help, but I don't think that it'll be easy to decide up front what you want to do until, like, I know that a lot of what I've shared with you guys so far has been very purpose driven. Like, what kind of thing do I want to do and how do I want to contribute? And, I think that question is really good because it brings me back to like, well, how do you start? Yeah. And just start.
Okay. Did you find interviews? Well, I guess for you, it sounded like it was connection through school, but it just for us, a lot of it we go through imposter syndrome, where we don't really quite feel like we're prepared for that first job. So did you have imposter syndrome on your first position?
Yeah, constantly. I
Okay.
run a meetup and I have no idea what I'm doing. I stand in front of people and I make myself very vulnerable. I put myself in a very vulnerable position with people. I did that here with you as well. I wasn't fully prepared for this, and I wondered whether or not I should be. And now I'm here, and there's just 7 of us. It's a nice little group, but I know that this will be seen by many more. And I worried that I needed to say something that was particularly poignant or meaningful or helpful, and I worried about having to have it all together, and I still deal with that, right? I'm sharing my experience right now because it's still right there. And the only way that I think that you can really deal with it is by calling it out. Like if you just sit on it and hide it and try to, that's when you're actually an imposter. Like I think the person who's hiding. Like if you can actually say what you're worried about or scared of, like there's a really cool activity that I recommend you do when you're starting a project or you're deep into a project with some people and you're worried about it. Or you think that maybe morale is dipping and people aren't expressing what worries them about the project. Just do the stinky fish exercise. It's called the stinky fish exercise, where you come into the room and it's as if you're carrying a stinky fish into the room every time, or you're on this video call with people and you're like, okay, so I'm carrying this around with me. Here's mine. Like, here's the stinky fish I carry in every time we talk about this project. Or every time the project comes up, here's immediately what comes to mind for me that is like the smelly, no good idea. And 9 times out of 10, like you're going to clear the air just by having it said. It takes away the power that it has over you and your team, and it lets you all figure out what to do with it. You got all these stinky fish piled up in the middle of the video call or whatever, and now you got to do something with it.
Just be genuine, I guess.
Imposter syndrome is totally speaking to that. Like you're worried about not having the skills or the ability or the knowledge, the experience, whatever it is. There will always be a form of that when whatever you do. You might be worried about other people one day. You might be worried about yourself today, but you'll be worried about all sorts of stuff when you work with people.
All right. So basically, it sounds like being genuine has some benefits. It kind of removes the tension and whatnot. So we have some other questions too that have been popping up. First one was from Alvaro. Just to also know, so again, we are 6 people currently in attendees, plus the ones who are talking in Kyle. We have members from all over the globe, and so someone can't join right now, but again, it is recorded. They'll see it later. It'll also be posted, so people will view it over time. So the first question here from Alvaro. I'm from Toronto, by the way. Alvaro's from Mexico, and we have from the US, from Nigeria, from Serbia, etc.
Awesome.
So Alvaro's question, how do you experience other members not being as involved as you on a project? Do you have a solution for that?
Yeah, I have a solution for it. It's a terrible solution. Just do it all yourself. This is the most basic solution. It works. This is why I'm sharing it first. It is the go-to solution that worked for me when I had people who weren't cooperating or weren't pulling their weight, whatever it was. This is what got me through school. I'm being honest.
Okay.
It's not necessarily the most effective or healthy or sustainable way of succeeding in these situations. I burnt out hardcore doing this. I don't recommend it. It is the solution though. What may actually be in the way for other people is something that you got to get curious about. Like people got so much stuff going on in their lives, and they may have so many different insecurities or like things that are occupying them that you don't even know about. That like that's the hard part, where you got to get to know other people and deal with whatever they're dealing with them. Like if somebody is like not pulling their weight, and I've had a guy who I was working with who just would not do anything he said he would do when I was in school. He just wouldn't. And it got to the point where my team every week was just having backup work done for his part. And like we wanted to allow him to do the stuff, but somebody would have just like been like, I did this, and it was kind of like not like we agree that we're going to do it for him, but like somebody would just do it. It was a weird group. And I talked to the guy, and he was like dealing with some really big stuff in his life, and he ended up having to drop the course. Like he's just got stuff going on, you know, life happens. I've had other classes and other groups that I've worked with where, quite frankly, I probably terrified people. I when I was in school, I was an incredibly domineering individual. I would want to take control of the project. I put my own reputation at stake. I would say that this project is me, and it's how I'm going to start my career, and it's going to be everything, and people will see how good it is in my portfolio, and if they don't see how good it is, it's because I let it fuck up because other people did something wrong or whatever, right? And then I would be very controlling. And that's a very scary person to help. So if you were worried about other people's contributions, I would really take yourself out of the equation for a minute there and get to know the people that you're working with a little bit so that you know what they're dealing with, what their stinky fish is about the project.
Okay. Do you still operate in the same fashion, do you think? Or has your modus operandus changed over time?
What was the question one more time? Sorry, Paul?
So your approach that you described, where you would be very domineering, do you still feel like you have this same operation, same mode of operation in situations today?
Yeah, not so much. The pendulum has swung the other way. Since that was back when I was in design school, and it was very much about ideas and about the quality of your research and knowing your stuff so that you could synthesize things into the right, like identifying the right problem and then creating a solution, the right solution for that problem. That's like idea stuff. And it was so important to have really strong ideas. And in development, I feel like since I've switched my career, like the past 3 years, I've been working way more focused on web development. I have not felt that same way. I am not as educated in this field. I do not have a computer science degree. I have an interaction design degree. I learned to code because it's fun, and I got power of doing it. And I don't know how to do things right. I am still learning every day how to do things right. I make so many decisions that add technical debt to projects inadvertently because I do not know the proper design patterns to apply all the time. And I learn so much in retrospect still. So this experience has been very humbling for me, and my personality has shifted quite a bit. I really lean heavily on my peers to support me, and I work with people very deliberately to create a kind of environment where we can teach each other what the best way we as a group can approach a problem. Given that we know the problem, what are the ways that we could solve it, and what way do we consciously choose to as a team? Like I work much more closely with my teams now than I did before, and that was a learned behavior.
Oh, well, very fascinating. We have another question here from, I'm sorry if I can't say your name properly, Chibazor. So the question is, I'm not into design really. I don't have the aptitude. But when you were trying to break into the community, what were the steps you took?
Just connecting. Can you hear me again? Hello?
Excuse me. Yeah, I can hear you.
My microphone. Steps I took. Well, I just went to a meetup, and I was just part of that community for a little while. And then I got involved by just asking if they needed help. I kind of just feel bad. Maybe it's how I was raised, but whenever I go to an event and I see people picking up chairs or cleaning up afterwards, I feel obligated to help because I got so much out of the event usually. So very naturally that led to me volunteering for the meetup that I was originally part of called Style in Class. So that was a meetup that was focused around the kind of like the connection between design and development for the web.
Okay.
And yeah, I just started helping, and then people started recognizing me as a contributor to the community because I would put down and take up chairs. Like it doesn't have to be anything crazy, but it's something that you can demonstrate in a community that people will, they can count on you to help. It's very visible, I guess. Anyway, that's how I started. It was literally just chairs and getting beer if we wanted to have beer for an event.
Okay, great. Our next question is from Michael. So the question is, previous MV webinars have stressed being hyper-communicative. That is the opposite of what my previous non-remote supervisors have asked me to do. Do you have any thoughts on communication in remote work?
I do. Okay, can you hear me? Yes, okay.
Yep.
It keeps putting up the banner that tells me it's got to resolve the microphone issue, so it stresses me out.
I haven't had a problem yet.
Good. Yeah, I think being hyper communicative could use a little bit of clarification there. What I would consider hyper communicative might be a bit like, I just read that and I think it's kind of annoying. I don't know what it's getting at. I mean, more communication is better than less communication, yes, but I don't know exactly what the intention other people might have had when they tell you this. But what I would hope for out of working with people remotely, and I have worked with people remotely, is that they let you know what they're doing. Like, it's pretty straightforward, but if you say, I am going to do something by this time, and then you do it, everyone's good. Everyone's happy because they know what the expectations are, and then you fulfill on them, and then you get to be a person of your word, and everyone trusts you even though they don't see you right there in front of them. It's creating commitments and then following through on them is what is important. If you are remote and you have integrity and you tell people that you are going to hold yourself to a standard, they don't have to do it for you. That's pretty much the kind of power that communicating can give you as a remote contributor.
Okay, thanks. Just look at the comments in the chat. Avar saying that beer helps you become part of our community, as in he's quoting you for that. All right, next question. Malvaro. It says, in the context of building a community, for example, creating a meetup, what have you done to increase the engagement of other members in that community?
There's lots of things you can do. I mean, beer certainly helps. Brings people out, and they otherwise might not have. But the most important thing that I've ever seen a meetup do is have engaging topics through speakers. Like, the reason that Ariel had me write a title for Lunch and Learn and make it look really official is because that's what will draw people. If there's a sick title and there's a really important topic to you that you want to learn more about, that'll be what brings people out and has them engaged, because they'll have an idea in their head of what they want to get out of or what they want to contribute for that event. And that's always been the case for the meetups I've run. And
thus the notion of clickbait was born.
Yes. Clickbait is useful, and it's especially so if you have to use 2 feet to get there.
Excellent. Okay, we have another question here from Emil. He says, I'm truly remote, to the point where there's no one near me who shares my interests. My career is now built on remote work. Do you see this mode of work being dominant in the future? Are there companies you are familiar with averse to global thinking? Would they welcome coders far and wide?
This is a fun one. I had a recruiter who I was talking with recently who was upset with me when I told her I didn't want to work with her anymore because all of the opportunities that she was dealing with were remote opportunities. It's not my personal interest at this point to take on a remote opportunity. I really value working directly with people face to face. I happen to live in an urban center and I pay exorbitant amounts on rent, so I will work directly with people. Thank you very much. I am paying to do so. But if I were in a different situation, of course I would consider remote opportunities. And I think that what she was trying to tell me, she's getting a bit righteous about it, was that this is the future. This is what companies are doing. More distributed teams will be common. And right now, even like you'll have distributed members of teams, even if the team itself is not necessarily distributed. And I've definitely had that at Bench right now where I'm working. I think that it'll become more and more common, and people will change their minds over this as time goes on. And this is like totally my hot take. I don't think that the development rate of like a lot of these urban centers is sustainable. I think it's like gonna push people out eventually, and I don't think that people are going to be able to afford to do these like hyper concentrated in-person offices in like one area. The talent pool will dissipate or distribute itself inevitably, and people will have to have distributed teams in order to operate once they're living somewhere that they can afford, or they're just going to commute like crazy amounts of time. But I don't think that's practical considering how viable remote work can be. So don't quote me on that, but I think things will change because of economical reasons as well.
Yeah. You're in Vancouver and I'm in Toronto, so you're in Canada's most expensive city. I'm in Canada's second most expensive city. So yeah. I think I largely believe quite a bit of what you're saying. A lot of things that are happening in big cities around the world, like London, New York, San Francisco, it's becoming unsustainable to exist in these cities. So I definitely can see a lot of credibility to that argument. The timeline is a big question mark on how fast that happens. People love being in the city. Not everyone, some people do, and so they'll hold on as long as they can.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's something to be aware of that it might be happening in the future. Or if you can work remotely, so you can then choose, okay, I'm going to live 2 hours out of the city at half the cost, but I can get the same job for the same pay. Why would I not pay half the amount on my living expenses? I can see that being a good argument people end up doing, and they don't want to travel anymore, so and save a lot of time on commute. Absolutely. All right, Alvaro, once more, we have, are you part of an international community? Is there a community you recommend joining / checking out?
I am not. The civic tech community is a national community, so there's a huge presence out in Toronto where Paul is. There is a presence in many different major cities in Canada, and they're all connected underneath a nonprofit called Code for Canada, which kind of supports them and connects people, basically, and provides insurance for events if you need it, which is helpful. And that's about as big as it's gotten. I've recently gotten in touch with Nick Hapner from Code for America previously. He was a working principal engineer with the White House under the Obama administration, and he organized hackathons for like the Department of Defense and like really crazy stuff like that. And I've only recently gotten in touch with him. But it's interesting to hear that he's like come over here from the States, from Code for America and from Civic Tech in the US. Now he's moved to Canada for political reasons. And he's interested in kind of sharing what he's learned from his experiences and perhaps connecting parties across the borderlines and what are people learning and how can we support each other. So that's like potential for international type stuff. But your question, I think, is getting at who can you join? I don't know where you are. I think, Alvaro, where are you located?
Alvaro's in Mexico.
Mexico? I have no idea what's going on in Mexico. And if there is a civic tech group, I strongly encourage you to go meet a bunch of people there who are interested in all of the places that tech intersects with people's lives. But if not, you can always start a civic tech group. You don't have to know anything. I'm a testament to that. So,
a build-up question then I would be, so there's various kinds of events that often get listed as things that you should perhaps get involved in if you're looking to be an aspiring developer, such as meetups, and then you have hackathons, and then as well as conferences, all the different things you can think of that are in the same suite of events. Do some of them you think are more beneficial towards helping you get your foot in the door?
Yeah. So I think that it depends on who you are and what kind of approach you have to networking. So maybe you're a very extroverted person like me. I'm kind of like not like super aggressively extroverted where like I'm going up and just talking to people cold all the time. Like I'm not that crazy. Like those kind of people do really well at conferences. If they're like, I'm so excited to talk about this topic and tell everyone about how much I know about Bash, and they just want to go hard on some topic and learn with other people who are all super, super inclined to be like extroverted, argumentative, whatever. That's something that totally works for a lot of people. Conferences are awesome for you if you're that. Um, if you're not, if you're like more introverted, you probably you're gonna want to approach like a conference or something with a little more strategy. You're probably gonna want to like figure out who's going to the conference, like maybe poll Twitter, poll some kind of online community so you can get a temperature gauge on like who's gonna be there, and then pick out some people who you think would be really cool to talk to, who you're interested in, and then find ways to schedule conversations with them while you're connected in the same space. Like use the fact that there is like a gathering and network with people who you may not otherwise get a chance to ask for coffee or something. And I think that works if you can get some like really quality one-on-one time in with a few people who you really intend to talk to. So that's my conference strategy. For meetups, I think it's like probably the best one overall because like you just get to know people. Like if you just show up over time repeatedly, people will know who you are. Like either you'll introduce yourself to them and then you'll have like a rapport and you'll see each other the next time and be like able to catch up. How's it going? Like, how are things at your work? How are things at my work? Blah, blah, blah. And then people will, if they know what you do, obviously tell them what you do and what you love about what you do. They'll keep an ear out for you. Like I know people who've like just finished code schools, who are like just getting their first job and like are waiting to see a position open up at Bench, and I'm keeping an ear out for them, like because I just know them through community stuff, and like meetups are the best way to build up that rapport over time and have that common network. I actually also recommend, especially if you're in a distributed situation or like completely remote, just find a Slack team that represents your interests. Like there's one for Vancouver called YVR Devs, and it's just like 1,000+ people who are all developers just nerding out about whatever hot topic is at the time. And there's tons of different channels for all the different subtopics within that. And there's recruiters posting jobs. There's all sorts of people talking about what's going on in the community. And the community in that one is specifically defined as being for Vancouver, but there are lots of other Slack teams that are interest-based or topic-based that I'm sure you can get into that would give you a sense of what kind of distributed opportunities there are too. So those are kind of, I guess, outreach strategies that I would identify.
No, interesting to think that your approach can differ based on your personality. Very good points.
Absolutely. My advice is going to be, unique to me, how I benefit from it, right?
Absolutely, of course. Okay, we now have a question from Michael. Have you had remote interviews for coding work, or have they been in person for remote work later? As in, I guess you go in person, do interviews, then end up being hired to work remotely, or if it's a remote position, you interview remotely from the get-go, is how I interpret that question, I believe.
Yeah. I'm in the interview process right now for Code for Canada's fellowship, and I did it last year as well. And they're based, well, I'm in Vancouver, which is the west coast of Canada, and they're out more east in Toronto and in Ottawa. So everything's remote. They're not flying me out there to do any kind of interviewing. And it's been really interesting. Last year, I got all the way up to the final stage, which was a group stage exercise. I didn't do that one. I would have been really interested to see how they do a group stage interview with remote attendees. But for the technical evaluations, like coding work, like you're asking, I did a pair programming exercise with like a really experienced guy, just kind of asking me to take a shitty data set, literally was a text file that was poorly formatted, and make an interface for a weather application based on the data. Actually, it didn't even say weather application. It was like, take this text file and make an app was the assignment.
Like a JSON file?
Sorry?
The JSON file?
No, a text file, TXT.
Interesting.
Like, it was like really, really weird. Like, it's on both parties to like make the interview process effective, and like this time they've learned from it. Like I talked to them about that afterwards, and I was like, "Are you just messing with me? Like, why were you messing with all of your applicants?" And I guess like you want to have a consistent experience. So you don't fix it after the first one. You want to have it the same, so it's fair for everyone in the cohort you're hiring for. But God, that was weird. So I spent most of my time fixing a shitty data set and then turning it into JSON, formatting it properly, and 10 minutes later started work. And it was like kind of talking with this person over a video call through my decisions. Like, what am I doing? How am I planning to allocate my time over the next hour? Asking questions aloud, like, kind of typical questions. Like, why would they give us a text file? What am I allowed to do with a text file? I don't know. Am I supposed to change this? And then kind of talking through why I built things the way I built it. Like I just built it in basic HTML with like one JavaScript file next to it. And I was just like going through the JSON object that I created and manipulating it in order to render some HTML on the page with the data. And I just talked through, why did I make the decision to build a scrappy ass app for the interview, and like being able to acknowledge the trade-offs in the decision. Like if I was actually starting a real project, I would do something totally different. But because we're doing a 1-hour interview and I want to showcase my ability to like do something, I'm going to do it like this. And then clarifying that part, I think, was helpful. Like, why am I making compromises in an interview setting is helpful to share with the person interviewing, so they know that you're aware of the compromises you're making.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. Yeah, excellent. Very cool. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions from our group. Feel free to fire them out now. Okay, currently we just answered the one from Michael. A couple people chat. Thank you for your response for your previous questions. Do you have any other, perhaps while we may wait for more questions to come in, any closing remarks you may have on anything you'd like to talk about, really?
Yeah, we could talk more about interviews, I guess. Like, are you interviewing as well right now, Paul?
So I'm not currently interviewing. Some of us within the group, we are like the first batch of students for this program. Some of us are going through interviews right now, again, all over the globe. Not necessarily just remote jobs, but remote jobs is more or less the final ultimate goal. Personally, me, I guess I'll throw my personal side to this, is I'm basically a JavaScript guy. We started off doing some stuff primarily with Ruby on Rails for some backends, some RESTful apps. Now we're into the JavaScript stuff. I'm really excited to get into the React stuff again. I haven't touched that for a while. I do not want to start interviewing until I've gotten considerably more comfortable with the React stuff. My personal experience from a year ago ish was that I was underprepared for interviews, and I did not like this feeling. I never like to be an underperformer because all these various online communities say, oh, after 3 months of learning to code, you're good to go. You can get a job, because they're trying to sell you their book or whatever. And so anyway, I did that, and they say, we like what you're doing, but you're probably not quite there yet. So I'm doing a lot more. So yeah, I'm looking to interview sometime soon. I'd say I'll enjoy front end and back end, typically full stack, but probably myself front end. Other people in the group, they prefer back end. So looking more on Rails stuff, maybe Node.js and Express, that kind of stuff. What frameworks do you work with? What is your go-to? What does Bench use? What are you strongest in that you use regularly? What are you weakest in that you use regularly?
Yeah, Bench. So one of the realities of like working at a mid-stage company, I guess, or a growth stage company, is that they made a bunch of shitty decisions early on in their application because they wanted to try something out and make sure it works, and that people will buy it. And then they have to figure out how to make it actually scalable and able to be contributed to by like dozens of developers. So that's where we're at right now. That means that we're migrating a code base from Angular over to React. And it had a very obfuscated data layer for managing all of the remote data that we were fetching and caching it and doing all sorts of weird stuff that there are off-the-shelf solutions for nowadays. like Apollo, and just like there's so much wheel reinvention that is in our code base that like just makes it super easy to trip over stuff all the time right now. Anyway, stack. AngularJS, React is what we're moving towards for the front end. We're using Apollo for data management, and we are basically moving. We would like to move towards having a GraphQL gateway, so that we're 100% using GraphQL. That's the long-term ambition, but for the most part, we're still dealing with like tons of REST endpoints from microservices that are written in either Scala or Java or Node. There's a bit of a mix there depending on who was here at the time in the company. There's like a couple of mad scientists who are with us that have now departed us. And
how big is your team, by the way, while we're on a topic?
Yeah, we have about 20 developers.
Excuse me.
But okay. Our company is about 300 people. It's very it's atypical. It's because we are a bookkeeping services company. So we provide bookkeeping services to you as a small business for a monthly fee, similar to a SaaS product. But then we let you talk to your bookkeeper that you're assigned through our app. So we have an app where you get all the data and you message with people. But then there's actually somebody who you're paying to have their time and dedication towards sorting out your books and answering questions for you.
Very cool. And do you find yourself preferring working with React and AngularJS?
I much prefer React. I prefer React because your templates and your logic are just types of components. We have a concept that we're doing here at Bench where we have very strongly delineated separation between this is a container component that handles fetching data and storing it and passing it through where it needs to be and providing the right actions or functions to the basically the dummy presentational components that it composes together. So there's one component that handles all of the messy stuff and how do we stitch it all together and provide the right functions, and then there's the actual what does it look like and what will it do if I click it and how can I give that to it, and I call them dumb presentational components, but we've actually gone pretty far in how we've been able to work with it because of the ecosystem around React and what's possible with things like styled components. And what else we're using? Pretty much that's the big one that's enabling us. But we've got an interesting themable set of primitive components that we've built that are generic enough that we can use them across apps. And we can extend an object for the theme that maybe changes some spacing variables. And then you can inject that into the primitive component set and it will look different in the app, although it's reusing all of the same code. It's really, really cool. And we're even figuring out a way to implement interface that we adhere to pretty strictly. By the way, we're using Flow typing. We're using statically typed JavaScript with a layer called Flow. And if you haven't checked it out, it's just adding on an extra compiler only set of static types that get removed and won't show at runtime. Don't do anything at runtime.
Is that akin to TypeScript?
It's akin to TypeScript. The difference is that TypeScript is a language that compiles to JavaScript, whereas Flow is JavaScript with annotations that get removed at compile.
Okay. So it helps you while you're developing, but once you're done and you've got your bundle or whatnot, you then no longer. Okay, excellent. On the topic of interviews, have you ever been an interviewer at this point in your career?
Yeah, I've been an interviewer I've interviewed for Bench once before, and I've also interviewed people through I guess the big tech, just people who want to get more involved and getting to know who they are before committing to bringing them on board.
Okay, and then from that perspective, do you have any particular stories of some do's and do nots you may have seen, or some really faux pas that some interviewees have done where they've failed, or something that you've seen some really great examples of or really poor examples of that you've observed, or something that people really struggle on that you've seen in interviews?
I'd like to broaden that a little bit, maybe some like more like the hiring process in general, but beyond like the interviews themselves, because I think they all work really tightly together. Like you could come into an interview but have the setup be all wrong, and like that kind of makes it weird. But one thing that I find really amazing when it works is having a code test done prior to having someone come in, because it means you get to have a conversation about the decisions they made in the code test. And there's like a talking point where it's comfortable because somebody's already familiar with something they wrote, rather than responding to just random questions that you might throw at them to test their technical knowledge. I don't think that technical knowledge questions are always the most helpful indicators of what kind of developer someone will be to work with. So I've been in rooms with people who are like asking like just like random questions, and like sometimes it can be good just to like get a sense. Like one good question I do think is really interesting to ask, and if you frame it correctly, it's really good, is what happens when you click a link? Like, just like open up the whole like client server browser relationship, like what is going on there, and ask people to talk about it. Because what it will do is it's actually a pretty open-ended question. It sounds like it will have a right answer, but it's super open-ended, because you could talk about what the browser is doing. If you're like super front end and you're like detailed, like understanding about front end and how the browser will render a page, and like you want to talk about performance and like all of that and like page load, that will be how some people go to for that answer, right? Other people may come from a more like server response backend like perspective, and they just want to talk about how a client and a server will interact with one another, and like what kind of handshakes need to be established and authorization and all of that stuff that might come up for them, right? And it's really interesting to see the variety of responses that will come out of that, and it will help you understand what kind of things the person is interested in, if they like what level do they get interested in those kind of topics that kind of are like the fundamental building blocks upon which we build on, if it's a web-based company. That one's a really interesting question to ask. But generally, I would avoid like the strict like what's the solution for something, or given this, can you spot the error? Like just so like pedantic and contrived and not helpful to gauge anybody. Very old school, and in tech, it just seems weird.
Do you still get, or do you still see odd questions like if you were food, what kind of food would you be?
You cut out there for a little bit, or you got quiet there. What was that?
Oh, I was just saying, do you still see oddball questions that are off the wall? Like, if you were a fruit, what kind of fruit would you be?
We had one at Bench in our application. The application initial submission has like, oh, what's your favorite Game of Thrones character? And it's like half the people don't even know, they don't watch Game of Thrones. And it's like super weird. And I was like, we should remove that. It's funny for people who know and weird for people who don't. And it does add a little bit of a moment where you're like, oh, would I fit in here? Like, is everyone here like super into their in jokes? Would I not get it? Like, I think it's helpful.
A good fit. That seems like a very good point to highlight. It's not just what you're capable of doing; it's how you get along with people. A combination of hard skills and soft skills.
Chivizar says Tyrone.
Probably
Tyrion? Not Tyrion or Tywin?
That's a great question. I'm going to guess Tyrion.
For sure. Okay.
Yeah, I agree, Tyrion. All right. Well, we're reaching approximately the end of the webinar here. But I'll thank you very much, Rowan, for joining us today on behalf of me and Kyle and the whole Microverse team. By all means, if you're able to perhaps in the chat, maybe provide some contact info that you're willing. Oh, Khaleesi. Did I choose Khaleesi? Maybe people have some more questions for you later on the road. If you're anything you would like to share like that, if you have a Twitter or anything like those you enjoy sharing. Not just thanks on behalf of Microverse and Ariel and myself and everybody here. Great having you here, and I really enjoyed a down-to-earth talk. I hope everyone has well.
Yeah, thanks so much for facilitating, Paul. Made it way more comfortable and easy to do this. I really appreciate the generous hosting.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely. All right. So I'll be stopping the recording here. Once again, thanks very much. And I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your questions.
Take care. Bye now.
Yeah.